Mark Scout pulled into the parking lot of Lumen Industries and he was distraught. Because about the only thing he could think about on his drive there was the fact that his wife had recently passed away. His face was stained with tears, but he knew he had to pull himself together and walk through the front door. And so he did. He found a Kleenex, wiped his face, and made his way across the parking lot. And as he's heading across the parking lot, everything is not okay. Yet, as he enters the front door and passes through security and steps into the elevator, something changes. His life changes. As the elevator makes its way to his particular floor, a switch is flipped. And so as he exits the elevator and begins to make his way to his desk, he sticks his hand in the pocket of his jacket and finds this Kleenex that is wet with tears. He has no memory of how it got there, and he's disgusted by the fact that he's holding a wet Kleenex that he has no memory of. He places it in the nearest trash receptacle, and on he goes. The pursuit of work-life balance at Lumen Industries is different maybe than anywhere else that you would see dealing with work-life balance issues. Yes, they think about it in the same way that many of us do. They think of it as a seesaw. It may look something like this. If work is winning, then that means your life is losing, and vice versa. If things are going well in your life, it must certainly mean that you're not giving your all at work. Work-life balance for many of us has become an illusion, something that we chase that we may never actually grab a hold of. But Lumen Industries has a solution. Their solution is a surgery. It's a surgery in which your memories become spatially dictated. And so when you enter the workplace, you have no personal memories available. And when you leave the workplace, you have no workplace memories available. It's called severance. At least that's the way it works in the Apple TV show by the same name. Mark Scout is the main character in this dystopian series that looks at work-life balance and how we may find ourselves struggling with and dealing with this idea of balance. When the pain of his personal life is too much to bear, he simply goes to work. And for 8 hours, he loses that painful memory, unable to recall the heartache of loss while he does his job each workday. In severance, memories are bifurcated, meaning that work life and personal life are completely separate. And though that's a fictional idea, it's seeking to solve a real world problem. How do we balance our work and our personal life? Because as we know, as we've experienced, everything affects everything. In fact, a 2022 study done by Deloitte discovered that 91% said that having an unmanageable amount of stress or frustration negatively impacts the quality of their work. And 83% said that burnout from work negatively impacts their personal relationships. Everything affects everything. Achieving work-life balance is hard. In fact, it may be actually impossible in some ways. And yet what happens at work deeply affects us at home and vice versa. And that's why we've spent the last several weeks talking about how we can beat burnout. I'm so glad you're here today. This is part 5 of our series. We're wrapping things up today. And my hope is that when you walk out the doors, you have a really good idea about what you can do to beat burnout in your life. Now, I get that not all of you work. In fact, I was in the chapel at the start of 9 o'clock, and I asked them how many of them are retired, and 99.99999% of the people raised their hands. But here's the thing. Burnout is not just about work. Burnout can also affect us as we're dealing with family relationships or caring for our parents or caring for our children or the club that we're a part of or the board that we've joined. All of these places can bring us stress and invite burnout into our lives. Over the last 4 weeks, we've been thinking about how pervasive burnout is and how it can impact every area of our life. And so today, we land the plane, and hopefully you walk away with something incredibly helpful. My name is Ryan. I'm one of the pastors here, and I would like to begin by defining a key term, something that I think matters as we have the conversation, and that term is burnout. What is burnout? Here's my working definition. When the demands on you are greater than the resources available to you. When the demands on you are greater than the resources available to you, that's when you experience burnout. See, burnout is more than having a bad day. And if we aren't careful, burnout can derail every area of our lives. We opened this series by me sitting at a desk over here and asking you a question. The question is, where do you feel burnout the most? And your answer was emphatic. Emotional and mental burnout is your greatest concern. And so as we went back and dug through the responses, they were anonymous, of course, but something became crystal clear. The struggle to balance job and family responsibilities leads to lots of angst in the life of the people who sit in this room. And so today, I want to take a look at the life of Elijah. Elijah's story is pretty incredible, and it gives us a picture, I think, of how we can face burnout when we're feeling like there's no way out. The life of Elijah is really fascinating, and he comes into the story at a really key moment. I think you'll understand, you'll remember parts of this story along the way. But Elijah comes into the story when Ahab is the king. Now, like most of these situations, the prophet comes in and has a word for the king who is not doing a great job leading God's people. And that's exactly what happens here. The king is Ahab, and Elijah comes onto the scene, and he's like, listen, Ahab, things are not going to go well for you. There's a drought on its way. Now, that's bad everywhere, right? I mean, you've been watching the news. You know there's a drought in the United States. We have water sources drying up. This is all bad news. But for an agrarian culture like theirs, where farming is really the central way of commerce and gaining food, it becomes really important. But you add on to that this other little fact, and it's the fact that Ahab's king, god of preference, is Baal, the god of fertility. And the god of fertility needs rain in order to bless the people with the fruit of the ground. And so by Elijah telling Ahab there will be no rain, he's saying, hey, listen, your people are going to be unhappy and your God is going to look silly. And the question is, is the word of the prophet actually going to come true? And it does. For 20 months, there's a drought among the people. It is a very dire situation for God's people. And Elijah kind of doubles down and wants to make sure that everybody knows that it's Yahweh, the one true God who is doing this. And Ahab's having none of it. And he decides to have this duel between Baal and Yahweh. Baal is a false god. He's the god of fertility. He has this one little thing he can do. And yet, here's Yahweh, the God that has been delivering these people time and time again. And so the duel is set up, and they begin to call down to their gods to burn up their offering. And the deal is that whoever's God answers first and consumes their offering is the winner, and that will be declared the God that they're going to worship. Elijah's a nice guy, and he watches as the prophets of Baal, 450 of them, call to Baal to bring down fire onto the offering. And it's got to be a sight to behold because they think that the harder they beat themselves, the more they whip themselves, the more blood that comes out of their bodies, the better their chances that this is actually going to come real for them. And so it happens for hours they call out, for hours they bleed. And Elijah pokes at them just a little bit and he says, hey, maybe if you call out just a little bit louder, you can wake up your God and he will bring fire onto your offering. And so they do it and they continue. And finally, Elijah's had enough and he decides to prepare his offering, the offering for the one true God. The offering is prepared, and Elijah prays, and it takes no time at all before the offering is consumed, and Yahweh has been shown as the one true God. Now, you got to think that Ahab doesn't love this, right? This is not good news for him. He's embarrassed because his economy is in the tank. He's embarrassed because his God has been defeated in this moment. But there's this other problem too. His wife, Jezebel, is really, really angry. And so she approaches Elijah and she says, hey, it's all fine and good that you won, but you're going to die. And so off Elijah goes. If you're keeping track, Elijah is the good guy. He's doing the right thing, and now he is literally running for his life. And maybe some of you can relate to that, right? I mean, you've been doing all the good things. You've been taking care of the people. You've been making your commitments. You've been doing your level best. You've been helping everyone that you can, and yet you still find yourself in this position, exhausted, anxious, worn out, in need of a little bit of relief. That's exactly where we pick up the story in 1 Kings chapter 19, starting in verse 9. There he, this is talking about Elijah, ran into a cave and spent the night. And the word of the Lord came to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put the prophets to death with the sword. Am I the only one left? And now they are trying to kill me too." Elijah is feeling some kind of way, right? He's convinced himself that no one else has experienced what he's experiencing, that he's the only person doing right, that he's the only person being persecuted. And it's easy to do. It's easy to look at the things happening in our lives and be like, why me? Couldn't this happen to my neighbors? They're not doing nearly as nice things as I am. And we feel let down, and we feel alone, and we feel under attack. And like Elijah, maybe we find ourselves on the run, trying to find a place to hide. Elijah's done his part. And in this moment, he's reminded that he is not alone. And God says, I'm about to show up for you. Starting in verse 11. The Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." You may have heard this before. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. When Elijah was facing burnout, the first thing he did was find a place to rest. It's important here, I think, to distinguish between rest and vacation or taking time off, because rest becomes a regular part of our routine. It's not something you do when you hop in the car and go. It's something that is a part of your daily rhythm in your life. In the Epic of Eden, Sandra Richter writes this. She says, I often remind my students that even in a fallen world, the only difference between work and play is who is making you do it. For me, to be able to get up at dawn and run 5 miles is pure joy. God bless her. That same 5-mile run is transformed into torture if the person waking me at dawn is a drill sergeant and he's running behind me yelling the whole way. The circumstances determine whether it's life-giving or life-taking. Finding rest is finding what gives you energy and committing to doing that thing. For some, it's a 5-mile run. For others, it's not a 5-mile run, right? I mean, there are time and place for running. For some, it's a weekly game with friends or a time out on the town. But no matter what it is, it's important that we find it, because in that way, we mirror the rhythm of the Creator to work for 6 days and rest for 1. Rebecca and I learned this lesson, how seriously some people take this the hard way. We were in Boston at the Children's Hospital, and we had just gotten there. Camden was on the 7th floor, and we arrived on a Saturday morning to go up to the 7th floor to visit Camden. And the hospital is normally like this bustling, chaotic kind of place, and you have to stand and wait on an elevator and the whole deal. This time, we walked up, and there was an elevator literally sitting and waiting for us. It was glorious. Got on the elevator, push number 7, the doors closed, and up we went. The elevator stopped on floor 1, and no one got on. And I was a little perturbed because I don't like it when people make the elevator stop for no reason. So the elevator doors close, and it's all good. We're going up. Elevator continues up. It stops on floor 2. And the doors open, and no one gets on, and the doors close. Same things happens on 3, 4, 5, 6, and I am so ready to get off on floor 7. Get off on floor 7, and we're having a conversation as we check in. We say something about that to the woman at the desk, the reception desk, and she says, "Oh, did you get on the elevator with the sign?" And we're like, "What sign?" Turns out this is the sign. This is the Sabbath elevator that on the Jewish Sabbath stops at each floor automatically. See, our friends that are committed to the Sabbath in this way don't want to do the extra work of pushing the button. And so on the Sabbath, they rest and allow the elevator to do the work for them. The rhythm of rest is so deeply ingrained in them that they simply will not sacrifice it, even to push a button. Dr. Esau McCauley's tweet says it like this: "Learning to rest is a skill. It's also an act of faith rooted in the belief that God is at work when you are not." Ouch. Because so many of us are convinced that the world can't go on without us. And if we'll only work harder and do more, then everything will be okay. But rest needs to become a way of life. And so here I am, the guy whose calendar is as full as everyone in this room, reminding you and me of the importance of allowing rest to be a part of your regular routine. But it doesn't stop there. In 1 Kings chapter 19, we continue reading. The Lord said to him, "Go back the way you came," which is so fascinating. Elijah has gone so far. He's experiencing rest. He's in the presence of God. And God doesn't come to him and say, "Now get up and forget about everything that's happened in your past." God's word to him is literally, "Go back to work." If you want to beat burnout, you rest, but you also work. Because if we're really honest, for most of us, walking away from our work or that thing that stresses us out is not going to be an option. And so we have to find a way to work through it. It's about finding a new balance, a new way of life, a new routine in which we can live. So part of overcoming what is wearing you out is finding a balance between that which drains you and that which fills you. God says, go back the way you came, because the only way through it is through it. Ultimately, work isn't the goal, it's the means to an end. Work is a path of life that allows us to experience the fullness of the way God created us and to bless the people around us as we live our lives for the common good. And instead of leveraging our work for good, too often we let our work control us. It's one of the greatest areas of stress across Western culture. It's one of the greatest areas of stress for you, at least if you were in this room during week 1. And I believe that the great resignation that's been going on for the last 2.5 years is a result of an unhealthy view of work. We're asking work to do something for us that it simply can't do. Work cannot give you meaning. Work is part of our life. It is not the fullness of our lives. And if we're honest, most of us manage toxic, burnout-inducing situations by taking a day off. I need a me day. I need some PTO. Sarah Todd offers this caution. If you're suffering from chronic stress at your job most weeks of the year, finding occasional respite at a beachside location or an urban oasis simply won't balance out all the bad stuff. And you can relate to that because you know this is also true. A 2018 American Psychological Association survey showed that 2/3 of respondents said the mental benefits of vacation disappeared in just a few days. That's not to say you need to go home and quit your job. Rather, to acknowledge that sometimes things aren't just going to get better, that it's not just a season, and that everything is out of whack. Work gets our energy. See, Elijah's path shows us that if we want to be on the other side of burnout, we need to rest, and we do need to work, but this third one, we need to worship. 1 Kings 19 through 21. So Elijah went from there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat. Now, I'm going to tell you something about me, okay? When I was reading this earlier in the week, just to make sure that I had everything buttoned down, I read Shaphat as Snapchat. And so, anyway, he was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12th pair. Elijah went up to him and threw his cloak around him. Elisha then left his oxen and ran after Elijah. "Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye," he said, "and then I will come with you." "Go back," Elijah said. "What have I done to you?" So Elisha left him and went back. He took his yoke of oxen and slaughtered them. He burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he set out to follow Elijah and became his servant. Elisha follows Elijah. He doubles down on the work that Elijah has already done as an act of worship. See, worship isn't just gathering with your church family. It is gathering with your church family, but it's so much more. It's about finding a way that we can invest in the lives of people from Monday through Saturday that truly makes a difference. It's about finding the things that matter to God's heart and having them matter to our hearts as well. Worship is about seeing a person in need and saying, not I see that need, but I'm going to meet that need. When my worship becomes part of my rhythm of life, when it's woven into the fabric of who I am, the way I live, the way I act and what I do, it breathes real life into the places where I find myself. Places where I'm easily frustrated and derailed. What's the key to beating burnout? It's to rest, it's to work, and it's to worship. And here's the thing. You can't do them all the time. There's a balance that you have to strike, but these three, if held in some kind of attention, can help us fight off the effects of burnout. Typically when I get done preaching, my wife comes to 10:30, she sits over here-ish, and I'll walk out the back door and I'll kind of come around. I'll be waiting to greet folks as they leave like I will after this service. And typically my wife is the very first person to say anything about the sermon. And generally it's, a kissing emoji, great job, babe, something like that. But when I preached week 1 of this series, I was walking out the back and I started down the back hallway. And I turned on my phone, turned off Do Not Disturb, and I looked at it. And I had a text from my wife and it said, "Did you hear anything you just said?" Which is a fair question. Because it's really easy to stand up and say something you're not willing to do. And it's something else altogether different to be willing to do it as well. If we're honest, we're all Mark Scout. We all pull into the parking lot of whatever the place is that we're going, and we're about to walk in carrying something on our shoulders. And as Pastor Jim reminded us last week, the yoke that we're invited to carry is not a yoke of anxiety or worry or the fear of failure. The yoke is the yoke of Jesus. And he says, "Take my yoke upon you." And we take Jesus' yoke upon us and we begin to live as he wants us to live. It doesn't weigh us down. It frees us up to be all that we have been created to be as we make a difference in this world. And instead of looking for a way to escape or seek a way to forget or to not have to remember or however you want to say it, the way to beat burnout is by choosing to live. And it's a life that's focused on Jesus. Will you pray with me?